Hi everyone, today I'm going to be talking about the lore from the Daevabad Trilogy. So the first book is The City of Brass, the second book is The Kingdom of Copper, and I am eagerly awaiting a copy of The Empire of Gold, which is the third and final book in the Daevabad Trilogy. One of my favorite things about the trilogy, although I did really like the characters, is that the world building is just really amazing to me. I've never seen a series where Middle Eastern history and mythology and folklore are used to create this kind of fully fledged fantasy world that builds on actual history and actual mythology instead of just having like a Middle Eastern skin on it. My main goal with this video is actually to talk about some of the backstory and the lore around the trilogy. This could be a good review if you've already read the first two books and just want a bit of a refresher, or if you're looking to get into the series and want to know a little bit more about what it's about. So I will start out by giving a quick setup synopsis of the City of Brass, but this video will be mostly talking about the lore and world building. So with the City of Brass, the story begins in 18th century Cairo. This is a time where Egypt has been occupied by the Ottomans, but is currently being occupied by the French. The main character, Nari, is a con woman who makes her living stealing and sort of doing fake or sometimes real healing, and as well as things like fake exorcisms. She is an orphan of mysterious origins. She has no idea who her parents are. As long as she can remember, she has been speaking a language that nobody else knows. And what's more, she can understand pretty much any language. She also can see what's wrong with people, like ailments or other things that are going on with their body. And she also heals very quickly. However, despite all of these things, she's a cynic and she doesn't believe at all in myths or in magic. During a fake exorcism gone wrong, she accidentally summons Dara, who is a Jinn warrior, and due to circumstances, they are forced to flee Cairo, and he is taking her to Daevabad, which is the city of the Jinn. Dara identifies that Nari is a Shafit, which is a mixed blood human and Jinn, and that she must be a descendant of one of their most noble families. This is because of her healing and language abilities, which are characteristic of that family, the Nahids. So he is planning to take her back to Daevabad. Even though he disapproves of her for being Shafit, he also is a warrior that is sworn to protect her family, so he feels some responsibility to make sure that she stays safe. Dara's situation is a little bit complicated because he just spent the last 1400 years as a Jinn slave to humans, which he doesn't remember, and he's also an ancient enemy of the current ruling family in Daevabad. Meanwhile, we have another point of view character in Daevabad, that is Ali. He's a prince, he's the second son of the king, Ghassan. Ali is young, he's fervently religious and really believes in equal rights for the Shafit, who, as I mentioned, are the mixed race Jinn who also have some amount of human blood. As well as being really idealistic and young, Ali is pretty terrible at politics and thinking sensibly and tends to get himself in a lot of trouble due to not really being able to moderate his views and just always doing what he thinks is right. His older brother tries to keep him out of trouble with mixed success. So that's the basic setup to the series. I mostly now want to focus on talking about the lore of the series, of the Jinn and other mythological aspects. I'm going to be talking about this as kind of a combination of what is in the trilogy as the mythology and lore, and also how that connects to real mythology and folklore. I'll try to be clear what I'm talking about when, but this is the aspect of the world building that really excites me, so I want to focus on that in this video. Pretty much everything in this book, right down to the names, is taken from some Middle Eastern folklore or mythology, and the author has said that she didn't want any of it to contradict the folklore or mythology that already exists, so it's really just kind of expanding on or building on things that are already there. Even the characters, they aren't from mythology, but they often have names that reference important historical or mythological figures. There is so much to this and so much research that went into this book, and I am very much not an expert in any of these things, so please excuse me if I get any of this wrong in terms of the mythology or pronunciations or cultures. I am really excited by the research and what went into this book, and it's been a really fun way for me to learn more as well. But I know that I'm not an expert in any of these things. I also don't have time to talk about nearly all of the stuff that's in here, so I'll just focus on a few things that I think are important. The elements that I see the most in this world are Islamic mythology and folklore, and also with a strong Persian and some Zoroastrian influence. There are other Middle Eastern cultures and things that are represented as well, but those are the predominant mythological influences. So first of all, let's talk about the Jinn, or Devas, as they used to be known, since most of the characters are Jinn and most of the series so far is set in Daevabad and other realms where there are Jinn and not really humans. Fundamentally, they are fire elementals. They used to be immortal and a lot more powerful than they are right now in the book. The name Deva, which is their original name as a race, comes from a lot of different origins, but it's an old Persian or old Iranian word that refers pretty much to evil spirits or demons, but very interestingly, the same word is the root of the Sanskrit Deva or Devi, which just refers to a god or deity, like not a bad one, but usually something good. So it seems like nobody really knows why that word turned into demons in one culture and gods in another, but there you have it. It's a very old word that's found in a lot of languages. So in the trilogy, the Devas, who were these all-powerful fire elementals, didn't like humans very much and tended to cause problems, whether it was getting the humans to worship them or just being kind of careless about killing them. Eventually, the Devas were cursed by King Suleiman, or Solomon, as you might know him, who was given a magical seal ring to control them and strip them of their powers. This is something that we see a lot in mythology in general, even in more Western media. You might think of Aladdin or the Thief of Baghdad or different things where you have a genie who's been in a lamp, and usually they pretty much always mention that they were cursed and imprisoned by Solomon and forced to obey humans. So this is a very old trope. It's also interesting to note that that seal of Solomon that he got in the trilogy as a ring is also something that's been around in folklore and mythology for a very long time, and it looks something like this. However, it is interesting to note that in the Daevabad Trilogy, the Seal of Solomon is not hexagram. It is actually an 8-pointed star. I don't know if there's necessarily any reason for that or if she just wanted to switch it up a little bit. So in the Daevabad Trilogy, after Suleiman stripped the Devas of their powers and they labored for him for 100 years as slaves, he asked them to repent and so that he would forgive them. And most of them said yes. These ones that said yes, he still basically cursed them to have more human-like bodies. Their powers became reduced and they became mortal, although still long-lived, and they still had powers, but they were no longer what they previously had been. He also split them into 6 distinct tribes in different geographical locations in order to divide them up more. Unfortunately, a side effect of this that Suleiman did not expect was that with their more human-like bodies, they became able to interbreed with humans, and that's where the Shafit came from. So the different tribes began taking on a lot of the culture and language and other elements from the different regions that they were sent to. I'll get to that in a little bit. The Devas that did not bow to Suleiman and did not ask for forgiveness, they were cursed to stay in their original immortal bodies with no powers, and they became the Ifrit. They are kind of some of the bad guys in the trilogy. They have somewhat overcome their lack of powers. They've somehow found new ways to get powers, so they are immortal and they've been around for 3,000 years, so they are very, very angry. They don't like humans very much, and they also don't like the regular Jinn very much because they hate everyone that bowed to Suleiman. One of the things that they can do is they are able to enslave the regular Jinn, and basically they make them lose their bodies, go into a vessel like a lamp or a ring, and then they force them to serve human masters. So when that happens, the Jinn who has been enslaved gains back all the powers, or a large amount of the powers that they lost by having their mortal bodies, but they also can only use those powers at the whims of a human master. It's basically a form of torture for the jinn that are enslaved, and there are ways for them to eventually become free, but they don't really go back to normal afterwards. The jinn have a capital city, Daevabad, where members of all the tribes pretty much dwell, although they each have their own individual areas as well. That city is where a very large portion of the series so far takes place, and it is kind of the most important location. It's protected from the human world, and only the jinn can go there. The city was originally founded by Anahid or Anahita, who was apparently the only deva that Suleiman ever trusted. She was his vizier, and he basically gave her his seal ring after he cursed all the jinn and told her to make sure they stay out of trouble. So she founded that city. Her family, the Nahids, became the ruling dynasty. As a side note, Anahita is apparently a famous figure in Persian mythology, which has nothing to do with Suleiman, but it's just another example of how S.A Chakraborty used different mythologies and wove them into one thing as part of this trilogy. So since it's an important part of the series, I'll talk a little bit about each of the 6 tribes and where they're from and what their cultures are like. That's also something that took me a little while to get the hang of as I read the book, although there is a handy-dandy reference guide in the front with a map. This was also a good way for me to practice my map reading skills, as in order to figure out which country all of these tribes of jinn are in, I had to reference a real-world map and refresh my knowledge of African and Middle Eastern geography. The current ruling tribe, the Kaziri, are desert dwellers. They are from the Arabian Peninsula. One of their magical abilities is that their language can only be spoken and understood by them, and it can't be learned by other people. So even though the Nahids usually have the ability to understand any language, that doesn't apply for Kaziri. However, their given names in the book tend to be Arabic. They use poisoned, flaming swords that are incredibly deadly, probably the most deadly weaponry in the lore here. The swords are called Zulfikar, and apparently this is also the name of a famous sword from Islamic tradition. You can look up that sword online and you will see that there are lots of swords that are made with forked tips that are in imitation of this, and that this is a sort of typical style in some Middle Eastern weaponry. So Ali, who is the second viewpoint character in City of Brass, is Kaziri. He's the son of the Kaziri king, but his mother is actually Ayanle, which is a different tribe that I'll talk about next. The Ayanle are a very wealthy tribe that live in basically Sudan and Ethiopia. I had to do some serious map reading to figure that out. We don't know a whole lot about them. One of the interesting things about them is they are the only tribe of jinn that really have any comfort with water, and some of them even swim. Typically the jinn, because they are still fire elementals, they tend to stay away from water. But Ali, because of his Ayanle mother, knows how to swim and is a good swimmer. There is also an association between the Ayanle and another tribe of elementals, the Merid, who in this lore are water elementals that are very powerful but are also mysterious and maybe menacing and haven't been seen for thousands of years. It's implied that there is some sort of relationship between them and the Ayanle, but we don't really know what that is. Next, I'll talk about the Deva. They were the original rulers of Daevabad. They took the original name of the entire race of jinn and took it as their tribe name. The Nahids were Deva. They also have a distinct religion that they practice. Most of the tribes of jinn have taken on a form of Islam. This is sort of an example of how all of them have basically taken on the cultures and religions and characteristics of the human areas that they inhabit. I think that what the Devas practice is intended to be connected to Zoroastrianism, which is an older religion. They are definitely intended to be Persian, and there are some elements of Persian language that I do see in their titles and names. A lot of the names of the important characters are drawn from Persian mythology. I don't know that much about Zoroastrianism. I don't want to put my foot in my mouth, but the Deva religion has a lot to do with fire and lighting altars. They are also vegetarian. Their warriors typically specialize in the bow. They represent the previous ruling class in Daevabad. They used to be the dominant tribe. They haven't been for many years, so they have a certain amount of power and influence, but they've also been treated kind of badly at certain times once they got conquered by the Kaziri. So they have a kind of arrogance, but they are also relatively oppressed in the situation that they're currently in. The main character, Nari, is descended from the Nahids, who were the Deva ruling family. I'll just quickly mention the last 3 tribes of the Jinn that I haven't talked about yet. They don't play a super important role in the series, but they are in there, and it is nice to keep track of who everyone is. So we have the Agnavanshi, the Tukaristani, and the Saharan, who are from North Africa. They have not played a very important political or storyline role so far, although we'll see what happens in book 3. So each of the tribes has its own quarter in Daevabad. There is also a section for the Shafit, who, as I mentioned, are the mixed blood human and Jinn hybrids. Some of them have only a little bit of human ancestry, and some of them are half and half. Basically, whenever a Shafit is born, they're supposed to be taken to live in Daevabad because Suleiman had rather sharply forbidden the Jinn from really interacting or influencing humans, and this is seen to be going against that order. However, the Jinn have not been very good at staying away from humans, at least when it comes to making babies, and also in Daevabad itself, it seems to be that the Shafit, because of their human blood, tend to reproduce more and have children more easily, and so their population is generally growing. The Jinn are long-lived, and they don't necessarily have a lot of children. The Shafit are generally treated like second-class citizens in Daevabad. They don't have the same rights as the Jinn. They are often enslaved or just generally treated badly. This continues to be the case, even though the treatment of Shafit was the main reason that the Kaziri rose up against the Nahids and the Devas 1400 years earlier. So even though that's the case, the Shafit are not exactly treated well in the present day, and that's one of the injustices that Ali is trying to correct. There are a couple other elementals and creatures that I want to mention. First of all, I already mentioned the water elementals, the Marids, who I think the name is just generally a kind of demon in Islamic mythology, not necessarily water, but in this series they are water elementals, and they play a pretty important role, but I don't want to talk too much about it. They're also quite mysterious, and we don't know too much about them so far. There are also the Peri, who are air elementals. They are seen traditionally in both Islamic and Persian mythology, where they are essentially good spirits, not exactly angels, not exactly fairies, but definitely winged. In the Daevabad Trilogy, they are sort of a weird bird person type thing. It's a little bit hard to describe, but they are very powerful and also seem to have some bearing on events. One of them has played an important role so far. It remains to be seen what role, if any, they will have in book 3. There are other creatures from mythology that show up as well. I don't think I have time to talk about each and every one of them. This could be a very long video if I keep going, and I think this is a good place to wrap. But if you're interested when you're reading, you can always take note of the different creatures and just look them up on Wikipedia, and it's really interesting to see how basically everything in this series has some sort of root in mythology. I found that really fascinating. It really gave the world building so much depth, and that is one of the things that I loved the most about this series. I really can't wait for book 3. I hope that this video helps get you excited about the series and helps you prepare to read book 3, and I think I will definitely be making more videos about the Daevabad Trilogy in the future, whether it's just my reaction or review to book 3 or something else. But I hope you've enjoyed this and found it helpful, and please hit the like button and subscribe if you'd like to see more videos from me, whether about the Daevabad Trilogy or anything else.